Wennerstrom from 1884 to 1950, and our presenter is Jeff Kenney. He is with Culver Academies Museum. He is the curator.
It's true, and I could speak in my Swedish accent, but I don't really have one. No, that went away after I came to America. As mentioned, I was born in 1884 and moved to the city of Malmö in Sweden, and I was a journalist, a typographer, and I got myself into a bit of trouble as a young man. I was actually a socialist activist at the time, and I wrote a paper criticizing our king, Oscar II, which got me in trouble with the authorities. I was actually arrested, although I was acquitted for the crime, but nonetheless, in 1912, I decided to get out of Sweden. So I bought a ticket, made my way eventually to England, and got on the fated ship, the Titanic, of course. We don't have a lot of time, or I'd give you more and more about this, but I can tell you I was a third-class passenger, and of the 123 Swedes on the Titanic, 112 were third class. I'm sure you know that in April of 1912, the Titanic tragedy claimed the lives of over there are different estimates, probably over 1,600 people died. I have a little typewritten piece that I began to give every year, starting in 1913, about my experience in the Titanic. So I've made a very short version of it. I'll read directly from it. As the ship is beginning to sink, the band was still playing Near My God to Thee. But now when the lifeboats were out of sight, husband had separated from wife, families had been separated, and friends from friends, and Titanic started to sink deeper and deeper. Cry, cry everywhere. Prayer and more prayer. Not very often has God been remembered and called on as he was that night. Men, as a few minutes before, had pushed out their belly and talked big words, that they were not scared of anything in the world, now fell down on their knees calling, my God, my God. One of our friends, an old man from Sweden, had been visiting America and said, goodbye friends, I'm too old to fight the Atlantic's waves. He went to the smoking room, and there on a chair was awaiting his last call. So did an English lady who took her child on her knee and sat down by the piano and played with her child until the Atlantic grave called them both. Coming out on the deck, we met a Swedish woman on her way to Chicago. She had, if I remember right, 4 small children and had not got them dressed in time to get on the lifeboats. So we helped her and her children, and I carried one of them. We met Captain Smith, captain of the boat. He picked up one of the children but said that our time was coming, and before he finished his words, one of the boilers in the engine room exploded and threw us all apart. This was the last I saw of the woman and her children. She's going to come into the story again. When I got back to myself in my memory, I remember I was floating on top of 3 human lives, which were interlocked together. When they went under, I got a hold of something else and eventually came back to a boat. I was declared dead in the first reports after the sinking of the Titanic, and went and at home in the old country, my parents found my name among the list of the dead. Eventually, we got that straightened out, obviously. By the way, my name in Sweden was Andersson, and I changed my name to Wennerstrom to hide again from the authorities. So my given name was Andersson, though it changes to Wennerstrom. My story remains one of the most documented of the Titanic survivor stories. It's been featured in dozens of books and TV programs. In 1913, I got on a train from Chicago and went looking for work. And by coincidence, Culver Military Academy was expecting a Swedish gardener to come work for them named Leo. my English wasn't so good at that time, so I arrived and they said, Leo? And I said, yeah. So I became known on the campus for the rest of my life as Leo Wennerstrom. In 1915, I married a woman named Naomi Johnson, buried here beside me. She was born in 1884 and died, as you see, in 1977. Together we had 7 children. One of them, the youngest, by the way, is still alive. His name is Culver. I loved Culver so much, I named him Culver. 4 of our sons served in World War II at the same time. While I was in the area, I went to Chicago and contacted Nils Poulsen. Poulsen was a Swede as well, who'd been a coal miner, left his home in 1910, went to Chicago and sent tickets, saved money. He was a Pullman porter, and sent tickets to his wife and 4 children to come to America to join him while they got on the Titanic. Those were the children, that was the wife. I remembered her name. And so I found him and I told him the story of carrying his children. He eventually moved to Culver, the town of Culver. In fact, he lived on Lewis Street in Culver, and got to be friends with a family named Weaver, who lived, many of you may know, who lived just outside of Culver on Thorn Road. He bought a little plot of land to garden, and he transplanted 4 maple saplings from that yard to the space on Thorn Road. And today there are still 4 maple trees growing on Thorn Road, one for each of his 4 children. I'm told by Dan Weaver, who was there as a little boy watching this, that he cried and spoke in Swedish as he planted these trees. Eventually, he and his new wife moved to Louisiana with family, where he died in 1964. He's also buried here in the cemetery. Meantime, I was the head gardener. I became the head gardener and landscaper, as you see, at Culver Military Academy. One of the many projects I was involved in was the creation of the bird sanctuary there, under the leadership of Bill Vaught, who was a famous naturalist who created that bird sanctuary. And every year I would tell my story of the sinking of the Titanic to cadets at the school, but also around to clubs and organizations all over the country. I retired eventually and became the head groundskeeper at the state school in Fort Wayne, and I died there in November of 1950. And I'm supposed to keep this short, so that is my story.
Thank you.
Eugene Eppley. He was born in 1884. He passed in 1958, and this is James Easterday, and he is going to be telling us all about Eugene.
Good afternoon, folks. I am Eugene Chase Eppley. I was born the only child of 2 parents, Owen and Jessie Eppley. My parents were somewhat affluent, but not rich. And my father's side of the family was involved in innkeeping as far back as the Revolutionary War. In fact, the Eppley Tavern was established and ran in Philadelphia during the Revolutionary times, and had such notable patrons as George Washington and Ben Franklin as frequent guests. My father, Owen, went to Ohio in 1882 and became the proprietor of an Empire Hotel in Akron, Ohio in 1882, and I was born in that hotel in 1884. Very little is known about my childhood after that point in time, my early childhood, because I refused to talk about it, probably because my father abandoned my mother and me and refused to provide any support after that, and my mother got her support from her side of the family. I enrolled in Culver Military Academy at the ripe old age of 15 in 1899 and was considered to be an exceptional student. I graduated second in my class in 1901 and was very active in all kinds of sports activities and activities at the Academy. It's reported that I said many times during my time at the Academy that if I'm a failure in life, if I'm not totally successful, it's only my own fault because I received an excellent education at Culver Military Academy. After graduating in 1901, I went to Stanford University and quite frankly hated it. And so I dropped out very quickly because I wanted to get started on my career. I had already decided by that time that I was going to get into the hotel industry, and I wanted to get going now. I went back to Canton, Ohio, and applied for a job at a hotel in Canton, and when the proprietor asked me what job I wanted, I said anything. I guess he took me at my word because he put me on a job moving furniture around the hotel, and I was paid 12.5 cents an hour. He later confessed that he didn't think I'd make it through the day, but I proved him wrong, and I made it through the day, and was very shortly thereafter promoted to bellhop, very shortly thereafter promoted to assistant manager of the hotel, where I was in charge of all procurement, all purchasing, and all food services for the hotel. My management abilities were apparently recognized because within just months, I was hired away from that hotel and became the manager, the true manager of Park Hotel in Pennsylvania. And within 6 months, I brought that hotel out of the red and made it a profit-making institution. At that same time, I was also elected vice president of the Pennsylvania Hotel Innkeepers Association at the ripe old age of 22 years of age. Throughout the next couple years, I moved from hotel to hotel, basically bringing them out of the red and putting them into the black. After that, I hooked up with a gentleman by the name of Frank Warden, who owned several hotels in the Midwest, and we actually became partners, and our mode of operation was to acquire a failing hotel, to modernize it, to put it back in the black, and move on to the next one. In 1917, I terminated that relationship with the hotel partnership with Frank, and started my own Eugene C. Eppley Hotels Incorporated, with 7 hotels that I had acquired by that point in time. During my association with Mr. Warden, we did purchase one hotel that was the turning point in my career because it was located in Sioux City, Iowa. And from that point on, my hotel ventures moved from the Midwest out to the Middle West, out in the Nebraska and Iowa areas. Everything after that was centered in those 2 areas. After I set up the hotel, I was able to acquire several other hotels, most notable the Fontenay Hotel, a 250-room hotel that was regarded as the most magnificent, largest, best hotel between Chicago and the West Coast, which was located in Omaha, Nebraska. I moved all of my operations to the Fontenay Hotel and continued on there for the rest of my career. Things went fairly well until 1919, when our government decided to pass the Prohibition Amendment, and that hit hotels very hard, and we survived that and then went right into the Depression. And after the Depression hit us, I'm very proud to say that I never lost a hotel. I did have one loan that actually it was the Fontenay Hotel loan, because I purchased the Fontenay for $1 million, and they thought that was pretty remarkable because it was I was 37 years old at the time, and back then that was a lot of money. That loan actually went in default, but I renegotiated it, and I paid off every penny of that loan in accordance with the Great Depression. So no lender ever lost any penny on me in the Depression, which was highly unusual at the time. After the Depression, things went very well, and through the 1940s, probably because we were moving from the train era to the automobile era, and people are traveling by automobile and using hotels. In the mid-1940s, I suddenly woke up and realized that I was getting older, that I had never married, that I had a pretty vast empire, and I needed to make an estate plan. So I set up the Eugene C. Eppley Foundation, and the goal of the foundation was strictly to provide for philanthropic purposes. In 1952, I believe it was, 2 or 3, I was approached by my alma mater, Culver Military Academy, who had recently started a building program. They had set up the recently, back then, Culver Educational Foundation, and they were going to embark upon their first building program since the foundation. They solicited me for $50,000 for the building program, and I refused. I said, instead, I will give you $500,000, and you will build, or we agreed that they would build the Hall of Sciences in the Academy. I almost immediately changed my mind and gave them another $500,000 for the Humanities Building. And so they received a donation of $1 million for me in 1952 and 53. Shortly thereafter, it became apparent that construction costs were a little bit higher, so I kicked in another $200,000. So that donation was $1,200,000. In the mid-50s, 1954 era, I approached the Academy and they approached me, and I donated $4.1 million for the construction of the Eppley Auditorium and Theater. Approximately a year later, I went back to Culver Military Academy for my last time, and I donated another $1 million for the establishment of 6 academic endowments, and that's basically a method of paying instructors additional funds for the exceptional academic instructors. With the Eppley Auditorium project, I was able to attend the groundbreaking, but I was not able to attend the dedication of the building because I had died 7 months early. So in the mid-50s, because of my age, because of the fact that I had had 1 stroke, I decided it was time to divest myself of my properties. So on May 22nd of 1956, I signed an agreement to sell all of my properties, consisting of 22 hotels and 5,420 rooms, to Sheraton Hotels. Now this was a natural because I was on the board of directors of the Sheraton Hotels, and I was a major stockholder of Sheraton Hotels. But then thereafter, I continued to live in my hotel, the Fontenay in Omaha, for the next 2 years until I died. I was born in a hotel, I lived my whole life in a hotel, and I died in a hotel. My remains are here next to the institution I love. Thank you.
William Osborn, he was born in 1885 and lived until 1981. And this is the Reverend John Houghton. Okay. And he is the Dean Emeritus of the Hill School Alumni Chapel, and he is going to be telling us the story of William Osborn.
Thank you. Well, so as the lady said, I was in business here for a long time. I started before I was, I must have been 10 or 12. I had a paper route here in Marmont, as it then was, and sold a paper called the Chicago Inter-Ocean. And since it was a Chicago paper, I had a lot of out-of-town people who were eager to subscribe. So I got to meet a lot of people who come to the lake for the summer or things like that. In fact, I got to meet Mr. Henry Harrison Culver, the founder of the Culver Military Academy. You may know his wife was about 9 miles north of here, and they met when he was a traveling salesman selling stoves out of the back of a mule wagon. So when I started off selling for the Inter-Ocean, there was nothing in this little burg. There was not a house that had indoor plumbing. There was no electricity. There were no paved streets. There were no sidewalks. There was just not much of anything going on. But my dad was determined to make up some of that. He built the Osborn block on South Main Street, the 4 storefronts of that. And he actually started a bank here as well. Didn't pay off very well, and he only did it for, 4 or 5 years before he paid off all of his depositors, and sold the bank business, or the building, to a man named McCormick from over in Argus. Well, Mr. McCormick couldn't make it work either. So he sold off to a gentleman named Schuyler Colfax Schilling. This is Mr. Schilling. And Mr. Schilling was from over in Knox. He was a prosperous farmer. So he thought he could make it work. Well, he turned out he couldn't make it work either. So he sold a lot of insurance to keep the bank open. But Mr. Schilling he had, among other children, a daughter named Minnie, and we were in school together. There were 5 of us in our senior class, 3 of us boys, and Minnie and another girl. And so when Minnie and I got married the year after we graduated, I told everybody that I'd married half the girls in my senior class. So we went to school in the old wooden school building that was behind where the bank is now, kind of where the bank parked. Well, actually, it was where Ohio Street is, because Ohio Street didn't exist yet. So we were in the old building, and graduated in 1906. Got married in 1906 and moved over to Illinois. Stayed there for a year, and didn't like it. I was working for the armor company. So we decided we'd move back to Culver, and did. Minnie went back to work for her dad in the bank,
And in the meantime, my dad had moved the old school building about, 100 yards to the other side of what was then finally had come through as Ohio Street, and he built the Osborn Hotel out of the old school building. So I worked for my dad and for Minnie's dad, and people got an impression that it really was a small town because they would check into the Osborn Hotel, and I would be at the front desk checking them in. Then I'd run around to be the bellboy to take their stuff upstairs. And then the next morning when they came to the bank, I would be the man cashing their checks. Well, it was touch and go at the beginning. We had $18,000 in the bank under Mr. Schilling to start off with. But things moved along. We became a chartered state bank. When the Depression came, we were the only bank in the county to come out of the bank holiday, open full first class, just like we'd been when we went in. So I think we did a good business. Mr. Schilling remained the head of the bank until 1951, but I kind of took over most of the running of it, to tell the truth. And I think we gave people a fair deal. We had two men always on duty, one who would do loans here in town, and one who would do loans out in the country, so business and farming basically. And because of that system, if you wanted a loan from us, we could tell you within 72 hours whether you were going to get the loan or not. And I always told them, they'd say, oh, Mr. Osborn, why is there so much paperwork to turn down a loan? And I said, well, I figure if you have to go to that much trouble to turn it down, then when I talk to the person and say, this is why you didn't get a loan, they'll know we gave them a fair shake, and maybe they'll come back for another loan later. And we tried to be fair to our investors. We tried to be fair to our employees. In a year in which we paid the stockholders a dividend, we also paid a bonus to the employees. And we had a cafeteria in the basement of the big bank here, not so much over in Argus, of course, the smaller ones, but in the basement of the big bank here, we had a cafeteria in the basement. They could get free lunch and free breakfast. We had a finance company that bought the bank up in La Paz. I remember going up, this is in the 40s, I remember going up to talk to the man, and of course he heard about me and kind of saw me coming, talking to the manager, and he said, now Mr. Osborn, I have to tell you, you cannot pay people up here in La Paz what I understand you're paying your folks down in Culver. And I said to him, young man, I just bought your bank. I've looked at your books. I have to tell you, you can't afford not to pay them what I've been paying them down in Culver. And sure enough, once I started paying a decent wage, they started doing their work and everything looked up for their bank. We got a little bit of reputation nationally. Mr. Thomas Watson, senior and junior, they ran the International Business Machine Company. And old Mr. Watson conceived of a system where he would encourage his salesmen by having a big party at the end of the year for anybody in the whole IBM organization who had more than 100% of their quota. It's a big tent city they set up, and speakers, inspirational stuff, and parties and what they another. So one year, Mr. Watson asked me to come out to New York and be the speaker at the IBM 100% Club, which I was happy to do, and they made a record of it. Well, that kind of interested. So then he came out here to see what banking was like in a small town. Old Mr. Watson, Thomas, and young Thomas, who was the one who got into all those computers and things, and two bodyguards, because of course you needed bodyguards if you're the Watsons, even if you're coming to Culver. And while he was here, he toured the bank and everything, and he took me aside and he said, now, Will, there's some farm property over on the edge of Marshall County I've been thinking about buying. I thought I might invest in a farm here in Marshall County. What do you think? Could you give me a loan? I said, well, Mr. Watson, I'd have to do a credit check. We had, gosh, so many stories to tell. I remember there was a young man who came in, this was back in the 30s. He put his wallet down on my desk, and he said, Mr. Osborn, there's $47 there. I've got taxes to pay. I owe you on the note for the farm. Of course, it was his grandfather's farm, 160 acres. I owe you on the note for the farm. I've sold all my pigs. I've sold all my corn. That $47 is what I've got. What can you do? And I said, well, now I'll tell you. If you had come to me with cancer, I would not be able to be very much help. You come to me with a banking problem, and I can help with the banking problem. So here's what I'm going to do. The bank will cancel your interest on the mortgage, and will pay off your taxes for the year. I want you to go back out and save that farm for your family. And he did. There's another story. Now this is going backwards. This is in the 20s, but did I tell you about the bank robbery? Did I tell you that story already? No, right. I get confused. In 97 years, you're entitled. The bank was robbed twice, once in the 20s and once in the 30s. And The first bank robbery, Mr. Sane was shot and killed. He's buried down that way. So they all got life sentences. And one of the young men, just the driver, he didn't have anything to do with the actual robbery. It's what we call felony murder. He was in prison and got in touch with me. And I thought, he could be saved. His father was a preacher over in Knox. I knew the family. So I got in touch with the warden, and I said, I want to be the young man's parole officer. So they released him and sent him over to trouble. My directors did not think much of my way of banking at this point, but I brought him over here. And young Joe Byers became an upstanding citizen in Culver. When he finally had a fiancée, he brought her to make sure I approved. And he lived his life out here in Culver and was just as happy as you could expect anyone to be. So I think we did a good job with him. Well, I could tell you stories. We tried to run a nice bank. We never charged people for anything. There was no charge for having a checking account or anything like that. We always had little things to give away. We had cards if you like to play cards. I was a Mason. The Masonic lodge was upstairs, so a lot of old guys playing euchre up there. There was the fresh calendar at the beginning of every year people always wanted to see. So as I say, I think we tried to give people a fair deal. I think we mostly did it. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your story. 47, and he passed in 1908. And Dr. Mark Couts is going to be sharing with us about Jacob's experience.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jacob Snyder, and here's where I've been wrestling since 1908, so I don't look too pale for a 113-year-old ghost, right? See that picture there? I used to be a handsome fellow. What happened over the years? Let's talk about my life both before, during, and after the Civil War, so let's go all the way back to the beginning. I was born June the 9th, 1847 in Wells County, Indiana, the youngest of 6 children born to Daniel and Charity Snyder. In 1850, my family moved to a farm in Pleasant Township by LaPorte. That's where I grew up. But later in life, when I heard that on April the 12th of 1861, the Confederates had fired on Fort Sumter, Southern states were leaving the Union, it fairly made my blood boil. I mean, how dare they, right? I considered it my patriotic duty as an American to do my part to help restore the Union, put down a rebellion. But I was only 13 years old at the time. My folks absolutely refused to let me enlist in the Army, understandably. So I impatiently bid my time. I worked on the farm and the war raged on. After 2 years of bloody conflict on March the 3rd, 1863, the government passed the Enrollment Act, the nation's first draft law. Why? Because by that stage of the war, the pool of volunteers had evaporated. They had to refill the ranks of the Army. The law made all able-bodied males between the ages of 20 and 45 subject to be drafted. But, where the government power and money is concerned, there's always a but, right? A loophole was put in the law whereby if a man was drafted, he could hire a substitute to take his place by paying the substitute $300, the government $300. Doesn't sound like a lot of money, does it? Folks, that's worth about $6,000 in today's currency. But as the war dragged on and the pool of, shall we say, willing substitutes dried up, that went up to $1,000 or more. Supply and demand, right? So why did they do that? Why was that loophole put in the law? 2 reasons: to protect the wealthy, the powerful, and the privileged, and to put cash in the treasury to help pay for the war. So lo and behold, in January of 1864, a wealthy Wabash businessman, whose name I shall not divulge, opened a letter from the mail. He looked at it and he gasped, "Oh my God, I've been drafted." What he did was he put an ad in every paper in northern Indiana looking to hire a substitute. I saw the ad and I thought, okay, here's my chance not only to serve the nation, but to earn some cash my family badly needed. So even though I was only 16 at the time, my pa relented. He sent a telegraph down to Wabash, says, "Okay, man, you found your substitute." So I went down there, we looked up the local government authorities, signed the necessary paperwork. I got paid, of course, in cash. Next day, I started off to Camp Morton in Indianapolis for infantry training. Once I got down there, they gave me a fancy blue suit like this, stylish, huh? A rifle, musket, and a bayonet, and all the equipment you see here a man needs to live in the field and fight. Spent the next 2 years learning how to be a soldier. My training was over. Excuse me. I was sworn in the United States Army and given orders to report to Company G, the 59th Indiana Infantry Regiment, fighting down in Georgia. Just a brief pause here. talk about my hat insignia. The hunting horn means I'm an infantryman. I'm a foot soldier. 59 is my regiment number. G is my company letter within the regiment. So with orders in hand, I got on a train, headed south to fight the war. So it was a mixture of fear and excitement, fear mostly. I finally reported my regiment at Cross Lane, Georgia in October of 1864. I wondered, how are these grizzled, battle-hardened veterans who have been fighting the rebels since 1861 going to accept this skinny, stupid, by then 17-year-old kid fresh off the farm? You talk about being intimidated. These guys all had full beards and mustache, and I didn't even start shaving yet. They would laugh till they cried watching the kid, me, stare in wide-eyed wonder at things they had already grown accustomed to over the years. But they took me in, they made me feel right at home, and they patiently taught me all the skill they'd learned over the years on how to live in the field and survive in combat. I got my first taste of active campaigning during the Sherman's March to the Sea. You all heard of that? That lasted for 36 days from November the 15th until December the 21st. In that time, we marched 285 miles, fighting, foraging for supplies, and creating a path of destruction 50 miles wide, right all the way across Georgia. We made Georgia howl. When the march was over, we laid siege to Savannah, Georgia, which surrendered to us on December the 21st. We knocked Georgia out of the war. So after a brief pause to reorganize, resupply, and rest, we began Sherman's Carolina campaign, where we marched all the way north through the state of South Carolina in the dead of winter, crossing icy swamps, rivers, fighting, foraging, creating a path of destruction. Now, if we made Georgia howl, we were absolutely determined to make South Carolina shriek. Why? Because they started this whole thing. We got to North Carolina, we fought and won the last full-scale battle of the war at Bentonville, North Carolina. That was on March the 19th, 1865. On April the 26th, the last Confederate Army left in the field surrendered to us, and the war was over. So hallelujah, I survived the greatest adventure of my life, right? Time to celebrate. So the entire Army was transported to Washington, D.C., so we could participate in the Grand Review of the Armies of the United States. That was held on May the 23rd, May the 24th. The Grand Review was over, the armies were disbanded, and my soldiering days were over. I was honorably discharged from the U.S. Army at Louisville, Kentucky on July the 17th, 1865, and I traveled from there up to Marmont, which is what Culver was called back then, to help my brother farm some land he owned about a mile over that way. A few years later, I met the love of my life, a lady named Edith Dawson. We met, we got to know each other, and yes, we fell in love. We were married on October the 1st, 1871. We were blessed with 2 daughters. Bertie, born in 1873, married John Hawk. Bertie and John are buried right over there where that flag is. John was a veteran. There's always a joke in our family that a girl named Bertie married a hawk. My one feeble attempt at humor. Our second daughter, Cordelia, was born in 1876, and she married into the Nightlinger family. The locals, if these names sound familiar to you, many, many of my descendants live in this area to this day. In 1899, our family took off on our next great adventure. Over the years, Edith and I saved our money. We were finally able to buy a farm of our own way out in Hamden, North Dakota. So we moved out there, we started raising crops, we lived happy, productive lives. But I still miss Marshall County, so to the day I died, I had the Citizen newspaper mailed to me so I could keep up on the local news and gossip. July the 24th, 1908, I died peacefully at home of heart failure. My family had my body brought back to the town I love, Culver, so I could be buried right here. So that's this old soldier's story. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're ever back this way, stop by my stone, wave hello, remember my story. I'll smile back at you from up above. Thank you.
Okay.
Nice to see everybody. Okay. Are you doing anything? Or
Oh, no, we talked on the way over.
Oh,
So,
okay. Okay.
How are you?
Hello, I'm Marcella Zechiel White. I'm 88 years old. I'm one of 6 children, born to Oscar and Nellie Zechiel. I lived in Culver most of my life. Graduated from Culver High School and then married Jesse White. Raised 3 sons, Paul and Phil and Perry, which I might add, 2 of which are here today, Paul and Phil, and Paul's daughter, Wendy, her husband, Jeremy, and their son, Julian. So thank you guys for coming. We're glad to have part of the family here today. Anyway, raising those 3 boys and shopping and cooking were some of my greatest pastimes. In 1956, I had the opportunity to buy half interest in the grill from my uncle Ellis Light. I became partners with my sister Mildred Dittmeyer in the restaurant business. The grill was on the east side of the south block on Main Street. In 1959, my husband woke to a fire in our two-story home west of Culver on State Road 10. Shouting and waking me and the boys, Jesse hurried to get the boys out of the upstairs bedroom, and I tried to call the fire department. As you might remember, in 1959, there was no 911. So in my haste and excitement, I called the wrong number. So anyway, Jesse grabbed me. We didn't have time to make another call. We got out of the house, and the boys and Jesse and I were safe. But the fire department come, but there was a lot of damage to the house and the furniture and both vehicles. Together, Mildred and I ran the grill for 3 years. Then, some of you may remember, Klein's Appliances was across the street, and they had the opportunity to move on North Block, right across the street from the State Exchange Bank. So they moved up there, and that left that building on the west side of the street then vacant, and it was a bigger building. And so Mildred and I decided to move over there and leave the grill, move over there and start the new restaurant, the M&M Restaurant. We did that in December of 1959. At the grand opening, I remember we served donuts and coffee for the public for free, and Paul, our artist in the family, he sat in the window of the restaurant and played the electric organ that was spared from the fire. He did that over the grand opening, and I think if I remember right, you did that on Sundays for a while afterwards too. He sat in the window of the M&M Restaurant and played the electric organ. The M&M Restaurant became a very stable place for the people in Culver to go and get good home-cooked food and to visit with friends and family. Mildred and I got to personally know all of our customers, and we wanted to do everything that we could to make their experience at the make their experience special. I remember one time Mildred and Lula went to La Paz to the blueberry patch to pick blueberries so they could bring fresh blueberries back and make pies and cobbler and what have you for the restaurant. They bought 300 pounds of fresh blueberries, put them in the back seat of Mildred's Corvair, and started home. Now, if you can imagine what's going to happen here, they had to make a sudden stop on the way home. And just like I Love Lucy, with her in that tub and she's stomping the grapes, yeah, Mildred and Lula were covered in blueberries in the front seat. And that story was told over and over again and got bigger as it was told again. But they were covered in blueberries. But they always wanted to do something special for their customers. They had a lot of regular customers. I remember one was Jack Spencer. He owned the heating company in Culver at the time. And he would come in every day for the same meal. He would get roast beef, mashed potatoes and gravy, green beans, peaches, and a half of a Milky Way candy bar. Not the whole thing. He just wanted a half of a Milky Way candy bar. So they cut it in half, put the other half in the refrigerator, and save it for the next day because he was coming back in the next day for the same thing and the other half of the Milky Way candy bar. There was another one, John Cleveland. He was the publisher of the Culver Citizen at the time, and he come in for a sandwich each day. And at that time, our sandwiches were served sandwich and fries in a basket. Well, it didn't take our waitresses long to learn that John Clevenger did not come into the restaurant for a picnic. He didn't want his food in a basket. He would send it back to the kitchen and tell them to put it on a plate. So we got to know in a hurry that his food would be on a plate and not not in a basket. We proudly ran the M&M Restaurant for 19 years. That restaurant still exists today. There were several owners between us and the present owner. It is now known as Cafe Max. It's twice as big now as what it was when we had it, but it is still there, still serving good good home-cooked food, and it's owned, the Cafe Max is owned by Susie Mahler at the present time. But this is a short version of my life story and also the history of the M&M restaurant. But if you remember anything from the history that you've learned today, remember that Marcella and Mildred loved this community. They loved the people in it, and they would do anything they could to make the people and the community a better place to live. So thank you for coming. If Paul and Phil, if you have any other stories, we've got another group coming, but if you have a short story that you'd like to tell, we really appreciate the family being here today.
I remember helping clean up from the fire, and I was sharing earlier, we used to have a summer kitchen. My mom was cleaning chickens in the back, and she yelled at me and said, "Paul Allen White, come here," and said, "Have you been shooting the chickens with a BB gun?" And I wondered who told on me, and I didn't lie. I said, "Yeah, I have been," and she asked why, and I said, "Well, I shoot them, they jump. I didn't think I heard them." It turns out there were BBs in the skin of the chickens. When she was cleaning the chickens. So I got caught red-handed.
Good,
So anyway.
good.
I wasn't that mean.
Made up for it though.
Died at a very young age serving his country in Vietnam. So, and Larry Washburn from our local VFW is going to tell us about
Joseph Loran Nunn. Joseph Loran Nunn's obituary appeared in the Rochester Sentinel on Thursday, April 30th, 1970. I would like to begin with it today as we honor his memory. Sergeant Joseph Nunn. The Vietnam War has struck Fulton County for the 12th time. The combat death of Army Sergeant Joe Nunn, 21, of Leiter's Ford. The son of Mrs. Dolores Engelbrecht and stepson of Raymond, who lived just south of Leitersburg in Culver Township. Sergeant Nunn was killed Saturday on a combat mission in South Vietnam. He was a member of the 199th Lightning Brigade. Sergeant Nunn's wife is the former Linda Slusher of Culver. The couple's first child, a girl, was born 4 months ago.
This shirtless lady.
Mrs. Nunn has been residing with her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Wilbur Slusher of Culver, while her husband was overseas. The sergeant had been in Vietnam for 7 weeks. He entered the Army last April. Sergeant Nunn was an outstanding basketball player for the former Albany High School in 1964, 65, and 1965, 66. Although only 6 feet tall, played center. And as a senior, he scored over 30 points in 3 different games, his high being 39. After graduation from Albany in 1966, Nunn worked at the farm of Doug Feltus in Albany Township until entering the service. Surviving with his wife, child, mother, and stepfather are 5 sisters and a brother. Fulton County's first Vietnam War death came in February of 1963. County victims of the hostilities, in addition to Sergeant Nunn, have been James Talbot, Kiwanis, James Amy Disco, Neil McKinney, Roger Mans, and Dennis Fairchild, all of Akron, James Utter, and Marvin White, both of Tallman, Timothy Rowe, James Ballinger, Lawrence Gibson, George Packard, all of Rochester. On Friday, May 1st, the following appeared in the Rochester Sentinel. Sergeant Joseph L. Nunn. Final rites are pending at the Easterday Houin Funeral Home, Culver, for Sergeant Joseph L. Nunn, 21, Road Route 1, Culver, who became Fulton County's 12th Vietnam War victim Saturday. His body is being returned to the funeral home. Sergeant Nunn was married August 16, 1969, in Culver to Linda S. Slusher, who survives. Also surviving are one daughter, William, at home. His father, Loran Nunn, Kentucky. His stepfather and his mother, Mr. and Mrs. Raymond Engelbrecht, Row Route 4, Rochester. His grandparents, Mr. and Mrs. Joseph Strobel, Culver. One brother, Kevin Cox, Rochester, and 5 sisters, Mrs. Paulette Washburn, Miss Pam Nunn, Mrs. Deborah Croy, all of Culver, and Miss Lisa Nunn and Miss Michelle Engelbrecht, both of Rochester. And then on Wednesday, May 6, 1970, the Mahler approved in the Rochester Center. Sergeant Joseph. Final rites will be at 11 a.m. Friday in the St. Mary of the Lake Catholic Church for Army Sergeant Joseph Joe Nunn, 21, Road Route 1 Culver, who became Culver County's 12th Vietnam War victim Saturday, April 25th, when he was killed in a combat mission in South Vietnam. The Reverend Joseph Bayland will officiate the burial of the old military honors will be in the Culver Masonic Cemetery. Friends may call on the Easterday Houin funeral Culver at 8 p.m. after 5 p.m. Those will be decided at the funeral Thursday. I would also like to share a couple of tributes posted on the internet from those who knew and remembered Sergeant Nunn. From Bill Rubin, posted on 3/27/2001. For the family of Joseph Nunn. To all of Mr. Nunn's family. I knew him only a short time before his death, but was impressed with his maturity, his sense of responsibility, and the love and concern he expressed for his wife and family. I had thought of him often, the life he lost, the lives he didn't have an opportunity to touch, and the loss for his family. From Mark Hendrickson, posted on 3/23/2000. Served with Joseph at Fort Benning. The men who fought and died are the names on the wall for all to see. Lives much too brief falling short, just a page in history. I can't forget their valor, even as I grow old, or the ultimate sacrifice they made, the bravery they showed. As I stand in front of the wall, crying in the rain, for all the men with whom I served and will never see again. I served with Joseph at Fort Benning during NCOC school. A great guy and a great leader. For guys. Tom Reese posted the following in 2015. Sergeant Joseph Loran Nunn served as an infantryman with Charlie Company, 5th Battalion, 12th Platoon, 199 Infantry Brigade, USARB. He was awarded the Combat Infantry Badge, the Purple Heart Medal, the National Defense Service Medal, the Vietnam Service Medal, the Vietnam Campaign Medal, the Vietnamese Gallantry Cross Unit Citation. Sergeant Nunn is on panel 11 West, 052 on the Vietnam Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C. Please pause with me as we remember Sergeant Joseph. On a personal level, I knew Joe as a friend and good one. He was also Joe's brother-in-law, so I knew him pretty well. I can attest to the fact that he loved his family and he loved that he had the opportunity to serve his country. I thought Joe to be a pretty easygoing guy. As they say, some stories aren't fit to print, but there's one that comes to mind. Now remember, Joe worked on a farm and went to work really early. We were on our way home from a away Aubie basketball game when Joe says, "Larry, would you drive a while so I can get some rest?" I was more than happy to get behind the wheel of his brand new Plymouth GTX. Always a ways down the road, I got into it a little bit and slid off the road. We were stuck. Woke Joe up, he just looked at me and shook his head. Joe walked to a farmhouse, came back with a farmer, his tractor, and pulled us out. By then I was in the passenger seat, didn't want to press my luck, so to speak. It was an honor to know Joe Nunn, and I continue to miss him. Thank you today for the opportunity to reflect on Joe's life. May we never forget those who gave their lives for our country, even though they are no longer with us. And let's make sure we honor our living veterans. We need to take a minute to talk about the VFW. They do too many things on a local and national level to cover today. Post needs your help. Dinners are served every Friday night, tacos for lunch on Tuesdays, breakfast on Saturday morning, through the season, Sundays for football. Please stop in and get yourself acquainted with the Post. questions?
Thank you. I'm like hitting this button here.
Okay.
I've walked through the cemetery on our own and just looked at all of it, but I never had a tour.
I'm Thelma Scott Hodges. I'm 75. I'm a proud black woman wearing slacks. After all, it's 80. It's 1980. And it is 80. I was born in Mexico, Missouri on July 31st, 1905. My father was William Roy Scott and my mother was Lily Mae Dooley Scott. My parents worked for Henry Harrison Culver, who founded the Culver Military Academy. When I was 2 years old, we moved to Culver. My father was to work in the barracks, and my mother was to be a domestic for several of the Culver faculty members. This is a picture of my father. He was called Sheep. He became well known at the Culver Academy and in the community. He was first a waiter, and then a supervisor of the trunk room, and then head of the custodial staff. He was friend, confident, and informal counselor to many cadets. He was the first employee to retire with a full-colored garrison parade, and he was made honorary member of the Culver Legion. I went to grade school and high school in Culver and graduated in 1923. I went to Howard University and graduated in 1927 with a bachelor's degree in education. I met Marcella Hodges, called Bob, in Culver. He came to Culver to be a waiter in the mess hall. He was born in 1902 in Virginia, and he went to West Virginia State College. We were married December 20th, 1930 in Chicago. Bob got his master's degree in German at the Howard University in 1937. When Bob was not working on radios or TVs, in his yard or at work, he was fishing. He loved to fish. He fished in Lake Maxinkuckee in summer and winter on the ice. He kept secret charts marking the best fishing spots on the lake, with coordinates like the following: a small tree trunk in line with the East Chapel window. Our daughter, Thelma Lily Hodges, was born in 1939. She went to Culver High School and graduated in 1957. She went to Virginia Union University in 1967 and taught elementary school at St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands. She met Raymond Moorhead and had two sons, Shelley and Chris. After teaching grade school, she got her master's and became a guidance counselor. After she retired, she traveled the world over and spent time with her beloved grandson, Yor. In 1944, our son Charles Marcel Hodges was born. He grew up in Culver, attended St. Elmo's African American Military School in Virginia, and graduated in 1962. The Culver Academy was not segregated then, so he couldn't go. He went to West Virginia State College and graduated in 1967. He settled in Silver Springs, Maryland, and married Antoinette Simmons. He had two sons, Charles M. Hodges IV and Jason Scott Hodges. Charles was a first lieutenant in the U.S. Army and served in Vietnam. In September in 1951, Culver had its first PTA meeting, and I was proud to say that I became the Culver's first secretary in the PTA. In August of 1963, Don Hand and I were appointed to the Culver Election Board. This is significant because women got their right to vote in my lifetime in 1920, and the Voters' Rights Bill was signed in 1965, 2 years after our appointment to the election board. I taught high school English in Scotland Neck, North Carolina for 15 years and returned to Culver in 1975. I was president of the Board of Zoning Appeals. I'm a Democrat and active in voter registration. I'm a supporter to oppose pollution
I'm a member of the Delta Sigma Theta Social Sorority of Howard University, the League of Women Voters, and a member of the Wesley United Methodist Church, where I'm superintendent of the primary department. After teaching in North Carolina, I returned to Culver and rekindled my lifelong love of antiques. I'm considered an authority on antique cut glassware and Chinese mudmen. I taught a course in antiques at Ancilla College. I was manager of the Country Cousins shop in downtown Culver, and I worked at the Collector. As a young woman, I played an active role in the Black Social Society of Culver. I was a member of the Entre Nous Club. Our mission statement was to inspire lifelong service, promote goodwill, and strengthen our community, values I've tried to live by my entire life. This is a picture of the Chinese mudmen. They date back 1,000 years. They're usually old men with long beards holding which signifies longevity, holding symbols of goodwill or good luck. Over on that table is some glassware. There's a picture of cut glassware, which is usually rough on the edges. You can feel it, and it's very rough. And the two pieces on the table are pressed glassware. Pressed glassware is made of molten glass and put into molds, and it's smooth on the edges. The two examples is the beautiful green bowl, and the tray is a GAR tray, or the Grand Army of the Republic. The GAR was a fraternal organization composed of veterans of the Union Army who served in the Civil War. So the tray dates back a long time.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And is there any questions?
Not that I do right now. Very good, thanks.
Thank you.